Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Karl, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
Not too bad. Better now that you're on. I think somebody else said that, so I stole it from them. Do you want to do a quick introduction so the people listening at home kind of know who you are? I know you've done several other interviews, and if people want to get the full story, of course, they can Google you. But let's do a quick intro, and then we can jump right into the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So I guess the best way to describe myself would be as a lifelong entrepreneur. I got started when I was 11, 12 years old, started taking it very seriously when I was 13, started by freelancing, built a couple businesses, sold a business in the past. And basically, most of my experience is in the freelancing space. So in my final year of university, I founded Revolancer, which is the company that I run today, which is a freelance marketplace looking to change the freelancing industry for better and forever. And we now have almost 120,000 users on board and growing fast.
That is quite impressive. So we're going to start. I started doing this 2 podcasts ago. There's a question from the previous guest that was on the show. So we'll start with that, and then we'll kind of jump into the rest of the conversation. But the question from Riley, he's a college basketball coach here in the U.S. He started off the question by saying he's a proponent of mental health, and he said, how do you take care of your mental health, and how do you use mindfulness to reach kind of your peak performance? And to add to that, I know you've talked about working under pressure a lot. So how do you kind of deal with that for yourself? Do you have any techniques, anything that you use specifically? Is that something that you think about often?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very good and very important question. I think, it's very, very important for anyone. But, for an entrepreneur, especially, I would say, because it can be a very stressful sort of working life. So, one thing that I do that's really helped me is working from the office, because then I can have that mental disconnect of working from the office and working from home. And then the other big thing that I practice a lot is detachment, which when I first heard about it, I think it comes from Buddhism originally. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, I guess would be fair to say. So I was skeptical. But really what it is all about is just taking some time to be mindful of the things to be grateful for, because I think it's very easy sometimes to take everything that's happening that's going well kind of as like, oh yeah, great, that's going well, and then to just focus on the negative. So taking some time every now and then to just think of all the times you've been very lucky and all the things you're very lucky to have can really help put things in perspective. So I do that frequently as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a topic that I certainly think about a lot, but I think I've got some good strategies, to cope with the stresses.
I would say so. Yeah, being an entrepreneur for sure, super stressful. Even running my own. So I have a normal day job. Then outside of that, I coach soccer or football and do individual trainings and stuff like that, and finding clients. And oh, sorry, I forgot that I had a training session today, and you're already at the field, and you're like, oh, I could be doing so many other things, and all the things that go with like the customer service sort of realm, which I think probably freelancing falls at least loosely into. So one of the things though, that when I was researching you and Revolancer, that I was wondering is, how do you guys make money? Because I saw that you guys had received some grants or some donations. But then I was also listening to an interview that you had done recently, and you said that you don't take like the percentage fees from the freelancers. So I was like, how do they keep the lights on? So, well, how do you keep the lights on?
Yeah, for sure. So, we've received a couple of grants from Google, Amazon, the UK government, and a few other ones as well. But most of the funds that we've raised has been from investors buying shares, so equity in the company. And right now, the short answer is we aren't making money. The kind of the goal with this is to gain as much market share as quickly as possible, and to then start monetizing, but also pose then a much more serious threat to the large incumbent platforms that are currently in the market. So Right now, the platform is completely free. We are going to, in the future, at some point, bring out an optional paid monthly subscription plan for freelancers, and also charge businesses to post listings on the platform. But yeah, for the time being, the platform is completely free, and we're just focusing on gaining as much market share as quickly as possible.
So going back to what we talked about a little bit before with the stresses of the job, how do you sell that to an investor, right? You say, hey, by the way, please give us some money. We're not making anything, but we will soon, right? And that's kind of it's an odd pitch to, or not odd, but people do it.
It's
But
very odd.
as the entrepreneur, it can be very stressful, right? You have to be so sure in your business plan and that your idea is going to work. And I think having done research and I've perused around Fiverr and some other things for various, like, oh, I need a logo for the podcast, yada yada, things like that. I've perused around and never actually used it though. Um, how do those meetings go? You go into into some room, some guy that's got money. You're like, hey, give us your money. We're making zero money. Actually, we're losing money. But if you give us money, we'll get it back to you eventually. How does that go? How do you prepare for something like that? How how are you mentally going into the room? Like the first time, I'm sure you've gotten used to it at this point, but like the first time, you're like, I'm gonna go ask this guy for money and I'm making no money. How does that
Yeah,
go?
so I mean, like you point out, it is, you know, if you look at how business is done traditionally, it's completely bizarre and very counterintuitive. But the space we're operating in is very different to most traditional businesses. So you know, we're a tech startup, of course, we're a platform. And the big difference there is, like, so let's say, for example, you have a restaurant chain, and I don't know, you go viral on TikTok or something, or like a lot of newspapers suddenly write about you, and tomorrow there are 1 million people who now suddenly want to go to your restaurant. You know, what do you do then? Well, you know, you need to probably build more restaurants. You need to find people to manage them, possibly franchise. All this stuff is going to, you know, it'll probably be a few months, optimistically speaking, until the next location can open, right? And those are some problems there. But in the tech space, if you have a platform, you know, today you could have 2 people using it, and tomorrow you could have 1 million people using it, and there isn't, I mean, of course, you know, you'll probably need to upgrade your infrastructure, but all of that can be done pretty much instantly. It's just a question of, you know, paying a hosting provider more money. And that is, and so that's one of the reasons why the tech world operates this way. The other reason is that when it comes to the most common type of exit event, which is a competitive acquisition, the larger sort of competitor who is buying the company isn't usually particularly focused on revenue. What they're focused on is the threat. So for example, if you take Instagram, Facebook bought Instagram at a time where Instagram had, I believe, 16 employees, zero revenue, zero ways of making revenue, and they paid $1 billion. And the reason why they did that is because if they didn't, you know, Instagram would probably pose an existential threat to their standing in the market. And that's a very similar case here, right? So there are very large freelancing platforms, and our sort of main way of posing a threat to them isn't sort of, you know, breaking even, making a bit of profit, growing at a sustainable rate. The way that we can pose a very serious threat is by scaling incredibly fast, taking up market share very, very fast, and getting a lot of brand recognition. And then we pose a serious threat. And then when it comes to that kind of exit event, that's what people are looking at. Of course, there are other kinds of exit events as well, like an IPO, and we are looking to monetize eventually. But for the time being, the way that we can create the most value for our investors is absolutely by focusing on scaling as fast as possible, so that, you know, if the time comes for an acquisition, for example, they can make a huge multiple back on their original investment. And all of the investors we have are sort of seasoned tech investors. So this is absolutely what they're looking for, you know, sort of a more traditional investor who wants to invest and then get paid you know, a small dividend every month and so on, probably won't find this appealing. Those aren't the people that I'm speaking to either. So yeah, it's a very kind of bizarre way of doing things, but it works within the space.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense, especially from from the competitor and the acquisition side. And that brings me to another thing that I heard in an interview you did recently, which was you got hit with a trademark, I guess, strike or something from one of the larger we'll say players in the industry. Um, what was, aside from the fact that you got the email and then the wave of panic that comes with when you read the email, what is the mitigation steps like, right? As being a super small startup, like you don't have the team of lawyers and all these other people that the big players have. And so where are you in? So this will eventually lead me to kind of the learning the legal side and the tax side and all the rest of it as an entrepreneur. But in this specific instance, was it simple enough to say, okay, we'll just change our logo and it'll go away? Or how, from a legal perspective, were you like, okay, I've got to find a lawyer, or like how did that go?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And essentially, at the time, this was shortly before we raised our first funding round. I think like 2 months or so before we raised our first funding round. And so at the time, I wasn't taking a salary from the business at all. I was working for free. We didn't have a lot of money at the time. So yeah, I mean, you're very much right. And when I got the email, I remember it was right before I was going to go to sleep. It was, I think, like 1 a.m. or so. Just quickly like checked a couple emails on my phone, saw, oh great, our trademark, we got correspondence about our trademark. That means it's been filed now. But no, it was something quite different. So then I stayed up the entire night researching as much as I could about trademark law. I spoke to a family friend who's a lawyer and kind of got some advice there. But ultimately, in everything that I found, is that if this matter were to go further, it very likely would not have been trademark infringement. But unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, the biggest wallet wins. And this company that filed the sort of dispute against us is worth billions of dollars, and they're a publicly traded company. So, what I then did is I negotiated with the lawyers that reached out to us because they wanted us to kind of change the name immediately. And I kind of said to them, like, we will change the name, fine. But can we have a few months of like a transition period just so we're not confusing our users? I remember we we had like maybe 200 users at the time, and I remember thinking, oh God, aren't gonna people are going to get confused and they won't use the site anymore, which now thinking back is so ridiculous because it's such a small user base. We now have, a little bit more than that. But yeah, they agreed, and we had a few months of a transition period, and then we came up with a new name, which I think is much better. Revolancer, which is a combination of revolution and freelancer, which is absolutely what we're looking to do. And now, we filed a trademark a while ago, which was granted, and no kind of further issues there. But yeah, I mean, at the time, not having gone through that kind of experience before, having like just graduated, and just kind of doing the startup. I mean, full time, but really at that point as a hobby, because at that was before I started taking a salary from it. It was a very, very stressful experience. But yeah, I mean, managed to get it all sorted out, and that's now thankfully a long way behind us.
Yeah, 100%. So how has the learning process been for you from a tax perspective, a legal perspective, right? It's like I know I've got friends who have started businesses here, and you have to go get your LLC license or your S corp or any number of these other things. Then you have to figure out how the tax code works and the insurance and things of that nature. A lot of my friends are the ones that I'm speaking about are in the more physical space, personal trainers, things of that nature. Um, so right, renting a space, buying all the equipment, all the logistics that you don't necessarily have to deal with. But at the same time, having started the entrepreneurial spirit, we'll say from a young age, right, when you're 15, you're not thinking about, oh, how do I pay taxes? Well, in the US, it's the IRS, but so the tax people don't come bang on my parents' door and take the house, right? So how was that learning process for you? Was there a lot of trial by fire, right? Trial by getting the email that some company has filed a dispute against you, or was it loads of research before? Did you have somebody in your ear saying, "Hey, if you're going to do this, you should probably look up XYZ"? How was that process for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I did a huge amount of research, and Revolancer isn't the first,
Where did the
sort of.
bug come from though to do the research, like to know what you're getting into in the first place, right? Lots of people have great ideas and they're like, "Oh, I want to start this thing and I see a problem in this market and my solution or my idea will really help the market." Right? Lots of people have that, but then to actually start it in practicality and all the paperwork and the hoops to go through, like did you have somebody in your ear as you're saying, "Hey, I want to start this thing"? Did you have people in your ear being like, "Hey, make sure you check this box and this box and this box because if you don't, the tax people are going to come and so is going to come from over there and ask for this money or this legal trouble." How was that process for you from like a behind the scenes, not necessarily the idea of the business itself, but being from such a young age, right? Like I don't think I'm we're probably I think we're probably around similar ages and kind of, the saying, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So
No,
like
I
how
know. I mean, absolutely. So, well, I mean, I've been very cognizant that I don't know what I don't know for quite a while. And I mean, both of my parents are incredibly risk-averse people. So in that way, I'm in many ways not like them, but I think some of that has rubbed off on me. So, I obviously was very much aware that you have to do things properly from the beginning. So I did a lot of reading, spoke to a lot of different people, and kind of learned what I needed to do to make sure I'm complying with everything. And then also, as soon as possible, started working with a law firm, with an accountancy practice, and sort of a payroll company as well, to make sure that I mean, like in theory, I know like roughly how to do a lot of the stuff myself. But I would much rather, kind of an expert handle it kind of on my behalf, rather than relying on the kind of knowledge that I've learned.
So you find a payroll company, you find a legal company that's working for you, tax people without the revenue or the how do you get these people on board, right? Because those people, at least in the US, are very expensive. Tax accountants and lawyers and things of that nature. I know you've got your investments, um, of course, but at what point in the process for you are you sitting there like, okay, we've got enough investment, now I can go hire XYZ expert in this field. We've got the funds to do so, or is it more on a because there's other times and the reason I ask this is because there's other times where you build a network of people and you can kind of say, "Hey, can you take a look at this tax thing for me real quick?" And it's a friend of yours and they're like, "Yeah, no problem." Like they'll do you a favor type deal. Where do you fall in that sort of range of hiring processes, I guess, for the outsourcing of those functions?
Sure. So in the first few months that we were starting out before we raised our pre-seed round, it was kind of a lot of knowing certain people, asking them for favors, asking them questions. When we had our initial terms of service and so on, we did then pay for a top sort of internet law firm to write that for us. But most of this came once we closed our pre-seed round, which was in later 2021, where we secured some venture capital funding and some money from angel investors as well. And then we could increase our operational expenses in that regard.
Gotcha. Okay. So one more question on the business side of things, and then I want to jump into the freelancing platform and kind of why I imagine that you've gone on this little podcast tour. So when you're going to secure investments from people and you go into the room and there's people that have all this money, right? And they've been around the block and it can be a little bit intimidating, right? To sit in a room with like, oh, that's that guy that invested in all these things that are now billion-dollar companies and that's that other guy. And how is it like for you going into the room kind of fresh, not necessarily like obviously you've got experience, but people can view you a certain way because of your age, right? I deal with that a little bit in my own, or I have dealt with it before in my own job, where people be like, "Oh, he's only this year, like this many years old," so it's like gives you a vibe, not necessarily anything that you've done to. warrant that, but people still view you, right? People take a look at you and right judge the book by its cover type situation. So how have you interacted with those situations? How have you prepared for them? How have you was the first time nerve-wracking? Like what's been your experience getting investments from these sorts of people?
Yeah, so I think the thing that anyone who's going through the same kind of process needs to realize, and I'm very conscious of, is that I think, if you're a founder and you're fundraising, especially if it's your first time, it's very easy to think about it from the perspective of like, you're basically going and asking, X very successful person for what is, a huge amount of money for your business, and it kind of and it kind of feels like you are asking them for a favor. I think is probably the best way to put it, but that's not the case. Investors don't invest because they're looking to do someone a favor. They're investing because they see an opportunity and to increase their funds, and basically, so the best way to approach a situation like that is to speak to people who you're not convincing to give, like, you're not convincing them to invest the money. They're going to invest the money. You are convincing them that your opportunity is the best opportunity where they should put that money. So those are the kind of people you want to be speaking to. And then it's just about presenting what you have in a very clear and thorough way, really knowing your stuff, being prepared for any questions that they might have, and then you're in a very good place to kind of go for it. But I think the very key thing to realize is that it's very much a two-sided thing. You aren't kind of they aren't doing you. I mean, of course, in a way they're doing you a favor, right? Because you're asking for the money that's going to help you grow your business. But then again, at the same time, they're buying shares in that business, and that money is going to enable the business to grow, and then their shares are going to be worth more. So it's very much a kind of a two-sided relationship, and I think it's important that founders view it as such.
Yeah. So just to follow up with that before we move on, how do you get in the room with those sorts of people, right? I know there was I think one situation where you were in some kind of business competition, I believe I read. Um, and you were talking about a guy that had reached out and you did no background research on him, and then you realized he was some super important guy. I think he's still an advisor for, I think if I remember that correctly. So I remember that one, but how do you generally get in the room with these sorts of people, right? Because not every situation is going to be Shark Tank, for lack of a better term. So how do you go about finding the people to then pitch to? Is it loads of cold emailing? Is it friend of a friend type situations? All of the above? It depends. Do you have a formula to do that, or how does that work for you in the tech space?
Yeah, so I mean, I've developed some good strategies. It depends whether you're looking to sort of target VC funds, family offices, or angel investors. But normally people who are looking to invest will advertise that online in some way. So you might see on their LinkedIn profile that they've angel invested in a few other companies, or you might go to a VC's website and see that they're investing in X industries, X average check size. You can check their previous investments on Crunchbase and so on, and then reach out. I've raised successfully from sort of cold emailing people, cold LinkedIn messaging people. But generally, a warm intro is preferred. So if you can get an introduction from another founder or from someone else, ideally someone that they've backed, kind of recommending you, then that can be very, very helpful too. But yeah, I mean, another distinction to kind of make is that shows like Shark Tank and the UK has one kind of like that as well, called Dragon's Den, and I think so as does Canada, by the same name. Shows like that are extremely unrealistic. Like that's not
Yeah.
how raising investment really kind of happens at all. And then even in the same vein, like only I think like a third or something of the deals who sort of, get money on Shark Tank actually end up getting the money, because at that point, the investors are just saying like, yeah, I'll give you, $1 million or whatever. But then comes the due diligence process, and then maybe they discover some skeletons in the closet or something like that. So actually, only I don't know the exact figure for Shark Tank, but I think it'll probably be about a third of startups that sort of secure money on the show. Actually, the deal actually ends up happening. Um, so yeah, I mean, in general, when it comes to finding investors, just anywhere and everywhere, you know, people have sort of VCs have websites that you can apply through. You can find email addresses through CRMs. You can find people's LinkedIn profiles. You can message them there. You can network with other founders and then you know, get introductions from them. So really, kind of all over the place. You know, which is how I've raised funding. Like, it hasn't really been in one way; it's been all over the place. But you know, there are lots of people who are looking to invest, you know, institutionals and individuals, and they can be approached online. So yeah, I mean, the best way is to just find them and then approach them.
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of, I feel like that's how it goes for most things. You need a job or any anything really, like, oh, you need an introduction, or hey, can you connect me with this YZ, like this person? Um, all right, so let's jump into Revolancer and kind of how you got into that. Reading your story makes complete sense to me that you would have gone into freelancing in the first place, because when you were 12, that's kind of the only thing that you could really do. And then as you learn and grow and know the space more, you find out what's good about it, what's bad about it, and then somebody with the mindset that you have would be like, "Oh, I'll do something about it." And so here you are. But is that kind of how it went, basically?
Pretty much. I mean, for my whole life, I'm someone who will constantly kind of not like try and find problems, because that sounds very negative. But I remember
No,
not
well,
that
it's
long ago.
you want to find things that you can fix or solve or find solutions for. It's not so I mean you have to find problems, but no, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I remember not that long ago, for example, I went to a VR kind of place with my partner, and I think I annoyed her to no end, because you know, she was there obviously to play VR games, but I was just sitting there like, hang on a second, there's one sort of room here that they do VR in. It costs X amount per session. They'll have to, if they want to pay the person working their minimum wage, pay them half of that amount. And then they have to pay rent and everything else. Like, how is this business making money? And I was just, you know, so this is the kind of stuff that I just naturally sort of think about constantly, like sort of over analyzing. Well, I don't know about over analyzing, but I guess in that case, you know, over analyzing everything. And that place actually shut down not that long after. So I think, you know, I was perhaps onto something there about it not being sustainable. But you know, I identify these problems, but then I also want to do something about the ones that I care about. And freelancing is an industry, you know, that for a long time has been very near and dear to my heart. And you know, and I have identified how things can be done better, and that's what we're executing now and growing fast, because we're really solving those problems that people are facing.
When you entered the freelancing world, what was your, right? Some people are graphic designers, some people are coders, some people are copywriters, some people are, what did you enter the freelancing world as? Like, what was your thing?
Yeah, so at very early on, it was graphic design, and then that quickly also became web development. So kind of, you know, design of websites and development of websites, logos, that kind of stuff.
So what made you go this route instead of starting a graphic design company or a web development company, or something along those lines, where not necessarily it's more profitable, but more from a more traditional, in a business sense, like you have coders or graphic designers and company X pays you for XYZ product and then product support, things like that. What made you go the route that you did? Or did you even consider doing something like that?
I did, and I also did start a web and marketing agency soon after. So I started a web and marketing agency when I was 18, and got an office on my local high street. But well, I mean, very early on when I started freelancing when I was 13, I didn't have a portfolio. I didn't know the first thing about sort of setting up a business, nor did I have the funds to do that. So then I started out as an individual, but then that quickly moved into, into that kind of agency format.
Gotcha. Okay, so aside from getting investment, growing the user base obviously is something that's going to be super important. You've been on we'll call it a little podcast, a mini podcast tour, right? The ones in the US where they go on Rogan and Patrick Bet David and all. We're not doing that. That's okay. What part of me, when you guys reached out in the first place, part of me was kind of like, this fits with his ethos of individuals who are trying to start things. Um, where and one thing I was struggling to figure out about you was where you fit in the business space, because for me, when you reached out, I was like, that seems odd, or maybe not like the best use of his time when he's running a company to go on a podcast that doesn't get that many views, not just speaking for myself, but the other ones you've been on have been fairly small, like less than 1,000 subscribers range, which I was like, that doesn't seem value for time. But you've been doing it, you've been consistent at it. So what's the thought process behind that? And then how have you enjoyed it as well?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I mean, first of all, from like a time perspective, I tend to go on usually, I think on average about one podcast a week, so it's about an hour a week. So from a time perspective, it's not particularly much. But then I think there are a lot of interesting kind of benefits from that too. So on the one hand, I'm spreading the word kind of about freelancing and about Revolancer. And in another vein, I'm sort of talking, openly and freely about how I approach things, which is hopefully useful to people who are listening to these podcasts. But also, I think makes it easier for people who maybe want to work with me to judge what I'm like and whether they want to work with me or not. So I've actually had a few investors who invested over the past few months have said that as a part of their kind of due diligence, they listened to some of the podcasts I was on to kind of get an idea of what I am like as a person. So it's been very helpful for that too. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think sort of for the time that I'm spending on it, it's very useful. And something that's very important to me is to pay it forward, because I've been able to do a lot of things that I'm very proud of at a young age. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had it not been for lots of other people who have had a lot of experience, very kindly giving me their time of day, for free, and helping me out. So I want to give back in some small way. And perhaps if there's someone listening, maybe I've said something that's inspirational to them or useful to them in some way, and that would make me very happy if that's the case. And I have received actually quite a lot of messages on LinkedIn of people saying those kinds of things. So yeah, it's yeah. I mean, all in all, to answer your question, I really enjoy it.
No, that makes total sense. And I want to also say that the reason I've been not necessarily, I wouldn't say I've been avoiding Revolancer, obviously, but a lot of the basic questions about who you are and what you've done, I feel like have been answered quite extensively. Just Google your name, and then the first 5 interviews are basically, "Hi, Carl. So, who are you, and what's the company that you founded?" And you give the little sales pitch. So I was trying to offer you something a little bit different, in this way. But so if you were to give the Revolancer uh, or freelancing kind of sales pitch for somebody that has no idea what it is, um, kind of think of your audience being someone who maybe was thinking of starting their own business or doing something on the side but doesn't really know what, like, come at it from that angle where you've got people who've got a skill set and they don't really know where to start. Like, why is going on Revolancer, and why, and what is this freelancing industry, and why is it an industry versus people just going off on their own, right? Because there's people that'll just off, like, put on their Instagram or Facebook, hey, by the way, I'm I'm doing graphic design. If anyone's interested, like why did freelancing become an industry in that way, and kind of what's the sales pitch, and then what does Revolancer offer that maybe is different from the rest of the industry, or how does it enhance the freelancer's experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even if they are just using Instagram, they're still using a platform to promote themselves and their services. But a platform like Revolancer is, of course, very much tailored to that specific use case, whereas a platform like Instagram is not. I mean, yes, there are lots of freelancers on Instagram. Yes, there are lots of clients of freelancers on Instagram, but that's not really the primary sort of goal or purpose of that platform and why people use that platform. When it comes to freelancing in general, why that might be appealing to someone, I think the best way to do that is to kind of deconstruct what the alternative is, right? So the alternative is a traditional job, typically, like a 9 to 5 working for usually a somewhat large company. And with that, that there are lots of benefits. So, you kind of have specific working times, you get paid holiday, you have job security. But for some people to whom freelancing is more appealing, that's not quite enough, especially when you think about it from this perspective. Like, take Google, for example, and Google is consistently sort of rated as, one of the best companies to work for. But even taking Google, the average Google employee makes about 100,000 USD per year, but brings in for the company $1.2 million, right? So you're being paid less than 10% of what the actual value you're sort of providing to the company. And of course, they can't pay you 100% of the value of your work. And $100,000 is a fantastic salary, right? But let's say you are a graphic designer or a web developer. If you're working for an agency, the agency is going to be charging the client, let's say $80 an hour, and you're maybe going to get 20 of that if you're lucky. But if you were to approach those clients directly, you could get those $80, or you could even undercut them and get, say, $60 an hour or something like that, or more. And then, also have a lot more freedom and flexibility as for like, when you work. Do you maybe not want to work that 9 to 5 schedule? Do you have other commitments? Do you have a family that you want to spend a lot more time with? Do you want to work from home? Do you want to just take the week off? All these kind of things become a lot more possible when you are self-employed. So is it for everyone? No, it's not. But I would say it's for a lot more people than who currently realize. But people are starting to realize, recently there was a survey that showed that 71% of Gen Z are either already freelancing or want to go into freelancing instead of a traditional job. And that is much higher than the current kind of percentage of freelancers to traditional job. But even then, today, there are 1.5 billion freelancers in the world, which is about a third of the global workforce. So things are certainly moving in that direction. And then if you do start freelancing, then Revolancer is set up to kind of be a one-stop shop to get everything that you need to get started. And like I mentioned, it's currently completely free. So on Revolancer, you can build your portfolio, you can network and collaborate with other freelancers and learn from them. You can exchange skills and services. You can connect with clients, display your portfolio, and sort of follow other freelancers and get inspired by their portfolio. So in some ways, it is kind of like like if you were to use Instagram to follow graphic designers, it's kind of like that, but it's really fit for purpose. Like you can't go on Revolancer and look at memes or videos or this kind of stuff, but it's very much tailored to that freelancing kind of workflow. So yeah, I mean, if you want to go into freelancing, I definitely recommend you give Revolancer a try. But just in general, I think that freelancing is a fantastic way of work, and more people are starting to realize that.
Do you have a lot of freelancers, I think, are part-timers, right? A lot of them probably have a 9 to 5, and then on the side they're freelancing in a variety of industries or skill sets. Um, do you have people who are like, I'll consider them like small businesses, like you got somebody who's formed an LLC and there's like three of them on there, like what is the extent of your user base from a variety perspective, and then also what's the variety of industries that you have? Do you have like personal trainers on there? Do you have like landscaping people on there? Do you have like people that are, I'll say, outside the tech world, but still are operating in either by themselves or with a very small team?
Yeah, so I mean, we absolutely have lots of freelancers who, would identify more as a small business. Maybe it is just them, maybe it is them and one or two other people on the platform. And as for what kind of areas we cover, right now it's anything that can be done remotely and predominantly kind of for the client side, be something that's appealing to a business. So we have a large range of different services, and we are going to extend that in the future as well to things, kind of where you have to be in person to get the best results out of them. But yeah, for the time being, it's kind of completely remote.
So how have you advertised from the client side, right? From we've talked about the user base a lot and getting people who are freelancers onto the platform. But how do you advertise from the client side, right? If I was to just Google, hey, I want a graphic designer, I would get loads of websites of agencies or of graphic design people, and then probably the first couple freelance ones would be Fiverr and a few of the other big names. So how are you working from that side to grow the platform?
Yeah, so essentially we work kind of directly with recruitment companies and sort of these large jobs platforms that have thousands of freelancing opportunities, and sort of post those to our freelance audience kind of on the platform. And then we kind of curate them and present them in a very personalized way to freelancers so that they don't need to look through, lots of things that aren't necessarily relevant to them to find things that are. So yeah, that's the way that we approach that. And yeah, I mean, generally on the client side, like yes, if you were to Google, I want a logo or graphic design or something, you're very much right. You will probably get some of those large freelancing platforms who are paying. If they're paying for Google ads, probably paying for a lot of those keywords, 20 USD plus for a single click on that link. But yeah, we do it in a very different way. And ultimately, right now, there isn't a platform that is kind of like a jobs board for freelancers, a large one other than Revolancer, because the way that a platform like Fiverr, for example, operates is, yes, of course, you can hire a freelancer on there, but you cannot actually integrate that freelancer into your company in any meaningful way. And that's because they take a commission fee. So they're very protective about how that relationship works. So you can't video call with the freelancer, you can't email them, add them to your Slack channel, talk to them on WhatsApp, none of that stuff. You have to kind of message back and forth with them within that platform. And if you try and sort of establish external contact, or they do, they'll get banned. And the other thing is, this isn't Fiverr, but another large freelancing platform has actually started fining people for trying to establish contact off platform. So that's just, in my opinion, that disrupts the people's workflow. Obviously, these platforms are also taking 20-25% of the freelancer's earnings. So what kind of value can they really deliver to the client? Can they give the client the value that they are paying for the service? I don't know. Not without taking a bit of a hit themselves at the very least. So yeah, I mean, we approach things in a different way, and to me that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the commission fees and not being able to establish the external contact feels kind of like it's against the spirit of what freelancing is in the first place. Um, yeah. I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about you, the person, the daily routine, I've noticed in several of your pictures is hoodies, um, generally going for kind of well, maybe not the Steve Jobs look, but it's the look where you don't have to worry about what you're wearing. I'm sure obviously you would change that if you were going to meet with some sort of investor or something like that. But you, the person, from a daily routine, what sort of things are you interested in? Outside of this, I would imagine that this has probably consumed most of your life up up to this point, but surely you have other outside hobbies or interests, things of that nature. So I guess we can start with like what does a typical day look like for you, and then we'll jump to the other stuff.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, a typical day for me is, well, it's going to sound quite boring, but waking up, having breakfast, kind of getting ready, going to the office. Then, well, I mean, at work, it's no 2 days are the same. It's kind of a mixture of, calling with investors. It depends also whether we're currently fundraising or not. So, right now we're fundraising. So a lot of my time is networking with potential investors, talking to potential investors. I sometimes make a small effort to dress up more with investor meetings, but in most cases I don't. So like if I meet an investor for lunch or dinner or something, I might put a shirt on, but it doesn't really go much beyond that. But I mean, ultimately, what how somebody dresses, yes, can of course impact perceptions, but really, doesn't say anything about their character or like what they're able to do. And I think investors realize that too. And that being said, like hoodies and t-shirts and so on are very much the uniform of the tech startup world.
Yes,
So
100%.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, then like in terms of hobbies and things outside of work. So I do spend most of my time either at work or thinking about work in some way, strategizing, planning. I mean, for a very long time when I was at school and university, I was procrastinating from school and university and instead like doing my hobby, which is, business and tech startups and so on. So in many ways, this is kind of still my hobby, but it's also my full-time work. But when I want to switch off from that completely, I like going for long walks. I like playing chess. That's something that I really enjoy. And yeah, just meeting up with friends, socializing, having kind of conversations with people that doesn't involve work at all, can often be very nice when I kind of want to switch off.
Yeah. Are you a morning routine type of person? Like you get up at the same time every day and first thing you do is you go get your coffee and then you check your email for 5 minutes and then you go on a walk and then you go to the office, or are you kind of whatever's coming that day type situation?
I mean, I tend to keep a pretty consistent like sleep schedule. It's not like every day exactly the same time. It depends like how late I've been up, kind of still doing some work or doing other things. Depends like sometimes I'll have an early start, like I'll have a call at 7 or 8 a.m. in which case I need to have a much earlier start. But yeah, I mean, typically I've got kind of uh a morning routine. Same thing for after work, which I think is a healthy thing to have.
Yeah, and yes. So I totally agree, and that's exactly where I was going. In which did you consciously establish one, or did you kind of just fall into it based on like the rhythm of your job and the other things that you have going on in your life? Because I know that there's sometimes for myself personally where I will have to consciously for like 3 weeks be like, no, I'm definitely getting up at this time every day because if I don't, then I'll hit snooze and then I will be less productive. Like even if I got the same amount of sleep and I woke up 2 hours later, like you just feel groggy, you know what I mean? So was it more of a conscious thing for you? Like, do you know who Andrew Huberman is or any of those guys?
The name rings a really strong bell, but I don't know off the top of my head
So
who it
he's
is now.
a neuroscientist that he works at Stanford University, and he also has a
Mhm.
podcast, and he's one about morning routine, and same with Chris Williamson and some of these other guys. But um was it a very conscious thing for you, or did you just kind of fall into it based on the nature of what your job is?
It's largely a thing I have to concentrate on, and be very conscious of. I mean, I think if I were to you know, just be led by whatever I feel like doing at the moment, I'd probably be like up working all night and then waking up whenever. Because like it's sometimes hard for me to kind of switch off and kind of take that step back. So I have to be very disciplined about, going to sleep at a certain time so I can wake up early and get like a nice bright and early start to the day.
Yeah. The next question is going to be completely unrelated, and um I'm asking it from the perspective of you looking at the US. So I've been involved with football for like my entire life, so I'm very in tune with Like, so when basically the question is getting at when Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney bought Wrexham, and I don't know where in Wales you are, but when they bought Wrexham, a lot of people from like that were close to me were like, "Oh, I didn't know Wales had a league," and I was like, "Dude, come on, man." But have you seen an uptick in kind of American, I'll say, traffic since, like, because there's a documentary and all sorts of things that are, I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it, Welcome to Wrexham and all. Are you aware of all this stuff, I assume?
I am aware of it,
Yeah, so
yes.
have you seen upticks in kind of American traffic just with your business since that happened?
Well, I mean, a very large part of it, we have a lot more users from the US than the UK. But you know, like not people sort of like physically being in the UK,
Right,
but
right.
sort of, you know, being at home. Um, I'd say like, yeah, absolutely. It's something that people talk about in Wales frequently. I'm not personally in Wrexham. Wrexham is some way up north from where I am. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely something people talk about a lot, and yeah, I mean, I know about the documentary and everything too. So yeah, it's just certainly something people like discuss here.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because kind of the way that the world is working nowadays, and sometimes people in the US kind of can be in their own bubble, which frankly annoys me quite a bit because there's the rest of the world exists. Will People here are, I'll say, not very attuned to the rest of the world. So the reason I ask, or kind of what I was getting at, is what has your interaction with Americans been from a business standpoint? Because obviously there's some Americans that are definitely attuned to what's going on in the rest of the world as well. But what is your view of the US? Like, how do you see it from outside the US, from and like from any subject really? Because we're sitting here in our own pile of, I don't even know, like, things are crazy here, but it seems like they're crazy in the rest of the world. But also, well, we don't know, Americans don't know how America is viewed from not America, if that makes sense. So like, what I guess, one, have you been to the US? But two, if not, well, two, what are your impressions of the US as a whole from kind of an outside observer perspective, both from business, like the freelancing kind of situation, but also just generally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I've been to the US myself. And another thing is like, you know, I've seen these kind of memes online. I think where Jimmy Kimmel was kind of you know, walking around with a map of the world and asking people on the street to point to where North Korea is, and many people point to the UK. Actually, some people pointed to Canada. You know, it's north, right? And a few things like that. But you know, I mean, that's for comedy. I mean, I kind of completely get it. I think the US is very much the center of the Western world. So, and it's a very large country with a huge amount of stuff going on. So, no, I can completely understand people, you know, being kind of focused on what's happening there rather than looking like super outside of that. I mean, like, you know, I can't speak on behalf of everyone outside of the US, but from a personal perspective, the way I look at the US is really as a very impressive and interesting country. I think there's you know, especially kind of a big entrepreneurial spirit there. I mean, there's this whole concept of the American dream. I think people in the US compared to Europe and especially the UK are generally a lot more open and a lot more optimistic. You know, which is because I'm a very open and optimistic person, so that always resonates really nicely with me. I work with a fair few investors from America actually who have invested in Revolancer. It's always a real pleasure working with them, just because like. You know, sometimes when looking at the investor mindset, for example, if you deal with a lot of investors who are from Europe or the UK, there's typically kind of a very you know, then there's not the case with the investors we have, but more so I see with some investors that I speak to in the UK and Europe, kind of like a negative kind of mindset of like, oh, why haven't you, got more revenue, and being very, very focused on these numbers and things. Whereas I think people from the US are kind of a lot more, look at the bigger picture, and kind of look at the dream and the possibilities. And typically kind of invest more in the tech sector. And well, I mean, just look at Silicon Valley. It's absolutely paid off. That is the right way to be doing things. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the US. I'd love to come and visit again. I haven't been to California yet. I'd like to go to Silicon Valley at some point soon. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I completely agree. I think people within the US kind of have a negative view of it sometimes. Um, and my friends who are close enough that I can remind them of this, like people still want to come here. Like the American dream is still alive. Like people are not going, "Oh, I want to go to the Spanish dream." Like nobody says that. Like they come here. So that your answer kind of leads me into the follow-up of Silicon Valley, and where do you fit into obviously there's the giants of X and Meta and Instagram and all these other like behemoth of billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of companies. But where are you trying to eventually kind of make your way to that, or is there is your exit ramp a sale of the company, or would you rather be collaborating or working with, or kind of what is your end goal, right? You've got all these giant companies, you've got your startup that seems like it's got a lot of promise, and it's in an industry where I think the world is shifting a little bit, right? The possibilities of being a freelancer are greater now than ever before. Um, and so what's the goal? What's the long-term vision, not just for Revolancer, but you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I mean, my goal with Revolancer is to permanently and forever, well, yeah, well, to permanently change the freelancing space for the better, right? And the goal that we're working towards is to become the largest player in the space and really influence a lot of great change. Maybe a very appealing acquisition offer comes along, which at the time we decide is the right fit and will influence that kind of change that we want to see. That is absolutely a possibility. But yeah, I mean, very much the goal I'm working towards is to build a large company that helps a lot of people, and has some really positive impacts on the space that I really care about.
Gotcha. Um, I think we've come to the hour. I think this is a good place to kind of call it. Do you have any last nickels, or actually plug where can the people find Revolancer and you if they're curious for more information?
Yeah, sure. So if you're interested in Revolancer, then just go to revolancer.com, or search it on Google, and you'll find it. And then if you want to connect with me, then LinkedIn is probably the best way. So again, if you Google my name, my LinkedIn will come up and you can connect with me there.
Any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Well, one thing I want to say is that for anyone who's an entrepreneur, or looking to become an entrepreneur, to just remember that consistency and persistence are the determining factors of success. More so than anything else. So if you are looking to go that kind of journey yourself, same thing is true for freelancers as well. Then just remember that consistency is key. Just keep going, keep trying, don't give up, and eventually you will become successful.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. A lot of successful people have taken so many hits on the way up. Um, Definitely can discourage people sometimes for sure. They see the fancy stuff on social media and they're like, oh, they must have just got it right the first time. It's like, nope, nope. Lots of losses on the way up for sure. Carl, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I think similar mantra to you, if one person gets something good out of this, then I'm a happy man. Um, and yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.